Great. So let's start. Perfect. Hello and welcome to yet another webinar of Ideas That Scale. Today's guest is Scott Sambucci. Scott is the founder of experience in sales, customer development, and company management in both startup and publicly traded companies. He has held several positions at companies such as CoreLogic, Altos Research, Pearson Education and Blend. As an academic, Scott served as a adjunct professor at several universities, including Hult International School of Business. Scott holds an MBA from Duke University and an MA in economics from University of San Francisco. Scott is also a three-time Ironman athlete. Scott, thank you so much for sparing your time and sharing your experience for our community here.
Yeah, glad to do it. Thanks for having me on. What do we want to talk about today?
Perfect. So we've divided it into the sales stage as companies grow to different stage. And the first thing I would like to know is like how did you get your first idea when you decided to turn an entrepreneur? And how did your first sales happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I get a question like this, I often think about it from two different perspectives. So I think about it, of course, from my own perspective as an entrepreneur who runs a business and is growing my own business, as well as, of course, from the lens of our customers, our clients. So we work with startups, enterprise B2B startups, and we help them grow and scale their sales. So I'll do my best to try to answer questions succinctly, and I'll start with kind of my own company. The first time I had sort of my idea that, at least for this current company that I have now, is after having spent about 15 years in Silicon Valley, in all three startups that I worked with, I was the first non-engineer. So I was basically like brought in. We've got this product, we need to figure out if we can sell it or not. Or in a couple of cases where we've got a product and a couple of customers, but we don't really know how to grow and scale the sales process. And that's what I do really, really well. And so in working in those three startups, it occurred to me that this is the same problem that I'm personally solving for these three different startups, where you have really smart people, really smart teams solving important problems in different markets, whether it's education technology or banking and mortgages or other types of industries. So you've got really smart people solving really important problems with really, really good products, but they don't know how to sell their stuff.
Right.
And so I got to the point where I realized, like, wow, if these three companies that I've helped those three companies get from their, basically zero revenue, the first couple of million, have these problems, it's probably just not luck for me that I'm finding these companies. There's probably a lot of these companies.
Yeah.
And so that's when I realized, like, wow, there's an opportunity for me as an individual not to just help one startup at a time, but what if I could help a lot of startups? Mm-hmm. And so that's when I decided to step away from working in a startup to working with startups on a day-to-day basis to help them, basically teach them the different systems and the different techniques and tactics that I've deployed myself at three different startups to help those companies grow and scale so they can make the impact that they want to make in the market.
Great. But so I think you became an entrepreneur after scaling many startups, but let's go back to the first sales that you ever made. How was that? How did that happen? In your life, before MBA, after MBA, I don't know, when did you do your first sales?
My first sales. Well, I think, I started off I guess you could say in college, I was a waiter, waiting tables at a restaurant, and you learn some really effective selling techniques there. You're constantly upselling your customer service, looking for ways to increase your tip. So it in a way was kind of a groundwork for my ability to interact with people and kind of understand what people need and how to respond to what they want. But out of college, I think my first real sales job came with Pearson Education, which you mentioned in the introduction there. So I was hired as what they call them in the higher ed industry, higher education industry, we call them publishing reps. So basically sales reps. You're selling textbooks and educational materials, and your customers, the people you're talking to every day, are university professors. because their job is to then choose a book that they're going to use in their class. So while the students are paying for the book, the real sale happens with professors. And so I was hired as a publishing rep in North Carolina and given a set of universities to call on every day. So that was kind of my first real sales job. And I was just going campus to campus every day, talking to 20 professors, knocking on the door, asking them about their classes, asking them how they teach, and helping them find the right textbook for their class and for their students.
And now that you're an expert in this field, would you have done anything differently at that time?
I don't think I would have done anything differently. I think, one of the things a couple of things that I did do, and this is just, I think, kind of the kind of person that I am, whether it's selling or running a business or doing Ironman and triathlons or ultra marathons, like I'm always looking for ways to improve. And one of the things that I did early on in my career was I just devoured as many books as I could to accelerate my learning.
Wow.
And so that was one of the ways that I was able to be successful really quickly. Is my very first year as a sales rep at Pearson, there were roughly 350 salespeople in the higher ed division. And I finished that year as the number 5 sales rep in the whole country and the first in my specialization. So I was this 23-year-old kid standing on stage receiving these awards, and everybody's like, why is the intern up there? Because I was so young. Everybody's like, who is that guy? And a lot of it was just because I chose to accelerate my learning, and I made a promise to myself to read 1 book per week and then try to implement at least 1 idea per week from the book that I read. So sometimes the books were really good and I was able to implement really quickly. Other times, you're reading 50 books a year. Not every book is great, but I made it a point to try to implement something that I learned right away. And that kind of led to a really fast acceleration in my ability to learn how to sell. And it's also helped me as a coach now, as a sales coach, to help my clients say, look, if we could just implement 1 idea per week, how would that change your business over the course of 50 weeks? Well, it would obviously change your business a big deal. So you can apply those same principles from early in my career to what I'm doing now, 25 years later.
Great. I think that's something I suggest Deepika often. So she started reading a book as well a week. Thank you for validating that, Scott. So our larger audience are solopreneurs, early stage entrepreneurs, and digital agency owners. And the constant, question between them is, should you focus initially on your inbound sales, outbound sales, or there should be a hybrid strategy? And if so, how should the balance be tilted? Maybe would you recommend something for us there?
Yeah, so I think, so whether it's inbound or outbound, I think I know it's a key question to try to think about as a business owner or as a solopreneur or somebody who's ramping up the business. I think more importantly, the way I think about this is, like, if I'm an early stage company, I probably have identified a problem in the marketplace that I feel like nobody is solving it, or the people that are solving it are not solving it the right way. And so there's this gap, or there's a hole in the market, and my job is to fill that hole with my product or with my service. And so I think the trap that a lot of companies fall into is they look around them and say, well, these are how all these other companies are selling. Like they're selling by sending a bunch of spammy emails, or they're selling by cold calling people, or they're selling by go to a conference and they spend all weekend just like beeping badges, beep, 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 and they collect a bunch of leads. So people think like, well, that's what everybody else does, so I'll just do that. I'll just copy that. And the problem with that is, one, we don't know if those strategies are actually effective for those other companies. We see them doing it, but we don't know if they bought, if they're getting customers from sending a bunch of spammy emails. We don't know if they're getting customers by spending all weekend sitting in booths. And secondly, the way that other companies acquire customers may not be the right process for you. And so one of the things that we always talk about here is, in the work that I do with clients, it's not about me teaching you a sales process and telling you how to implement it. My job is to teach you your sales process. So every company is different. And so that means rapid iteration, and that means experimenting and not being wed or stuck with like, well, I'm going to do emails because that's what everybody else does. And so that what I mean when I said at the top of this answer about the trap that a lot of entrepreneurs fall into is they say, well, I guess I have to do a bunch of outbound because that's the way you get sales. And I think the right way to think about it is saying, well, let me just sit down and make a list of, say, 20 different ways that I could potentially go find potential customers, do my prospecting. There's conferences and LinkedIn and email and phone calls and webinars and white papers. You could very quickly get to 20. And then say, okay, well, which of these 20, what 2 or 3 does it seem like is the best match for my market? So for me personally, in my business, LinkedIn is a really, really good place for me to go find people that are entrepreneurs, B2B startup people. And so we developed a really specific way of generating conversations with people through LinkedIn. Now, for other people,
for the first time on LinkedIn.
Yeah, exactly. So for us, we get a ton of traction by doing LinkedIn. A second thing that we do that found it works really, really well is doing live workshops. So if I go and I'm able to teach, which is kind of what we're doing here in this webinar, but I do it in a live setting, and there's 10 or 15 or 20 people in the room, and I can spend a half a day with them and teach them a bunch of stuff about their sales process, then we find that people say, wow, that was really good. And if I got that much value out of half a day, imagine if I was working with Scott every day for the next 365 days. So for us, those tend to be the 2 places for our business that work really well. But if I go and tell you in your business, you should do LinkedIn and workshops, maybe that's just the wrong way to do it. So really the key here is not to say, should I do inbound or should I do outbound? It's creating experiments for yourself and saying, okay, for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to first identify my perfect prospect. Who is the ideal person that if I could choose any customer in the world to work with, then whose problem I feel like I can solve? How do I make sure I know who that person is? And secondly, how do I reach that person? And then experiment with different ways of doing that over the course of a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And by doing that, that's what will help any entrepreneur figure out what their sales process should be. So it's not about inbound or outbound. One is better than the other. It's figuring out what works best for you.
Perfect. So now, since again, repeating that, largely early stage entrepreneurs, do you recommend that the initial sales process be driven by founder? Or let's say, when do you do your first sales hire in this case, let's say a VP sales or someone like that?
Yeah.
At what point in the startup stage, you should hire someone?
Yeah, so you should hire somebody after it's painfully obvious that you should hire someone. So what I mean by that is every founder should get their first 10 customers on their own.
Perfect.
Period. If you're a company founder and if you're saying I don't know how to sell, so I'm going to go outsource that by hiring somebody to do my selling for me, or I'm just afraid of selling, then you shouldn't be a company founder. Period. You should look at that problem that you want to solve and view that as your single mission in life is to go talk to every single person in the world that has that problem and show them how you can help them.
Yeah.
Right? And if you're not willing to do that, then don't be a company founder, period.
Perfect. I also believe in that, especially because, as a founder, you got to sell every day. You got to sell to your investor. You got to sell to your employees. You got to sell to your parents and family members. You're taking such a big risk. So you shouldn't be afraid of selling for sure. Now, let's say, how should the sales plans be made, Scott? Should it be top driven, as in the CEO decides the number based on cash flow, or it's also based on, how much can your hand reach, which is basically if you have one sales guy or one first hire as a VP sales, how much he or she can reach? How should people go about deciding on these numbers and what they should be able to achieve in, let's say, first year of growth?
Meaning in terms of revenue projections?
Yeah, in terms of revenue, and also when should they hire, how they should hire, or what should be they, trying to achieve if the product, let's say a beta product is ready within the next 1 year, what kind of numbers they should be looking at, especially in a SaaS, it's kind of.
Yeah. So the model that we kind of bring our clients through, we found that there's kind of 3 main stages or phases of a startup's life. Mm-hmm. So the first phase is startup mode, the second phase is ramp up mode, and the third phase is scale up mode. So the startup mode is get your first 10 paying customers. And I emphasize paying because a lot of times I'll talk to founders and say, yeah, I've got 10 free pilots running right now. those are my 10 customers. And my response is no, you don't have any pilots running. You have 10 free trials. And those people are users, not customers, because customers give you money. So those first 10 paying customers are critical. And even if you're underpricing it and you're knowingly underpricing it just to cross what's called the penny gap, that's absolutely critical. You have to figure out how you are going to deliver value to the customer. And the way that we globally have decided the way value is exchanged is by the exchange of money.
Yeah.
So that startup phase is all about getting those first 10 paying customers. Once you've got that, then you move into this ramp up mode. And typically in the ramp up mode, that's where you're trying to hit the first $1 million in annual recurring revenue. And so that $1 million is kind of it's sort of a loose benchmark, because at $1 million annual recurring revenue, that's when most venture capitalists will say, look, if you hit $1 million annual recurring revenue, then we can talk about a Series A round of funding. And so if you hit that benchmark, that can afford you capital. And then that capital, whether it's $3 million or $5 million or $10 million, that allows you to then say, okay, now we've got $1 million in ARR, let's 10x our growth. Like, let's get to $10 million ARR. And that's the scale up mode. And so those three phases, startup, ramp up, scale up, they can take anywhere from 6 months to 3 years, or in some cases never, because a lot of startups never get out of startup mode. A lot of startups get out of startup mode and into ramp up mode, but then they level off and they don't scale. So I don't necessarily look at it and say, well, in the first year you should do $555,000 in revenue. It's more about how do we prove in that first phase of startup mode? How do we prove problem, product, market fit? There's a problem in the market. We have the product and people are willing to pay it. And so for some companies, that's $10,000 in revenue. For others, it could be $500,000 in revenue.
And should they also focus on, not just the product market fit, but product market and distribution channel fit, where, figuring out a channel that is scalable and repeatable there, or, is it like you should constantly keep experimenting in terms of?
Yeah, I think it's a little both. I mean, I think, I did an interview on my podcast with a woman named Jen Spence, and she works with partners. She's like big into partnerships. And one of the things that she shared was that most startups wait too long to set up partnership agreements of some kind. So Jen Spencer, excuse me, not Jen Spence, Jen Spencer. And so like her philosophy is create partnerships as soon as possible, because that will help you with maybe not necessarily your distribution channel of delivering the product, but at least helping you.
Yeah.
So those could be other companies in your marketplace selling complementary products. They could be consulting companies that are serving the same companies that you are. Partnerships could be with ways to distribute content. So you could have partnerships with different industry groups or meetup groups where you have a chance to get your voice out and reach a lot more people. So I think early stage, I would focus on how do you get your message out to as much of the market of your target market as you can to fill the top of the funnel. And then later down the road, worry about how do you support and distribute that product and sell that product through those partners. So early stage, fill the top of the funnel. As you progress and you grow and you scale, look for ways to have people deliver the product, implement the product, and service your customers.
Great.
Who should design the first sales process of a company, Scott? Should it be the CEO, or should it be coming from the sales team that you're hiring?
Well, by virtue of what we talked about earlier, because the CEO or the founder is doing the early selling, they're the one that's going to be developing that early sales process. But I think of it as getting together enough of a framework with whether it's with toothpicks and bubble gum and duct tape. Like, we should be able to come up with some kind of framework that says, okay, we have 10 customers, and like of those 10 customers, this is how we found those customers. This is how we walk them through our sales process. And this is how we set up our pricing and contracts and implementation. Now, it's a loose framework. It's like a blueprint. Once you have that, that's a much stronger way to then go recruit an excellent VP of sales, because then that VP of sales is not saying, well, there's no process here. It's going to take me 6 months to figure out the process. Whereas a really good salesperson would go, wow, this founder already built the first framework. I'm just going to build on top of it, and we're going to be able to go that much faster. And so I would say the founder, CEO, founding team is responsible for the earliest version of that sales framework. And then when you get out of startup mode and into ramp up mode and you start hiring a sales team around you, that's where you hire really smart people to help you build on top of that framework. Just like a software platform, right? You say, here's a platform. I've built this platform. I need you to help me configure it and customize it. It's the same thing with your sales process.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's something that we follow here, that until someone has, one of us has not worked on any vertical for at least 6 months, we don't hire anyone. It actually which basically means we should know what process or what numbers are achievable, and we should get a touch and feel of that. Great. So now you just started talking a little bit about hiring, and I think hiring is one thing where a lot of founders fail. I've failed myself miserably. And how would you recommend to go into sales? Because, salespeople, good, even a half decent sales guy is normally good being, at convincing people. So, they have stories, they can tell you, they can convince you, but, that doesn't mean they can do, consistently perform and, reach out to a large number of people. So how would you recommend to go about hiring for a startup?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. It's a question that I get a lot, and it's a hard one, because if you ask most startup founders, like you just said, hey, I've tried to hire and I haven't done, I failed in the past. I personally have been a sales manager and I've hired people that haven't worked out. We've all failed at it. So we can all identify with this problem. And whether it's hiring somebody who doesn't have a ton of experience but talks a good game, or somebody who is, we think of as like Mr. Rolodex, who's been in the industry for 20 years and has all these contacts. Well, it doesn't mean that person's a good fit for our startup, because they might be used to having all this marketing and customer support all around them, that there's 20 steps in the sales process and they're only responsible for steps number 17 and 18. So when we think about selling, and one of the things we work on with our clients when we're helping them build out their sales hiring systems, is we think about the sales hiring system in 4 main steps. So the first thing we want to do is define the job. So what exactly is the job that needs to be done, so that we're really, really clear as to what kind of talent that we need, what kind of experience we need. And also, by defining the job, it tells us what the metrics are for success, so we can set up our incentive program the right way, right? We always want to make sure that we're aligning our incentive program with the behavior that we want, because whatever incentive program you set up is exactly the behavior you're going to get. So let's make sure there's alignment around the job and how that person will be successful, right? So define the job is one. Step 2 is then go find people. So how are you recruiting? How are you identifying good candidates? And just like with selling and just like with capital raising, hiring should be an everyday thing. Maybe not literally every day, but every week or every month, you have to make it a priority to go out and find and recruit the kind of people that you think want to work at your company. Because just like raising capital, if you wait until the time where you need money, it's too late, or you're going to be stuck taking whatever capital is there at that moment. Whereas if you've developed a pipeline of candidates, if you've talked to a lot of people, you've built out a whole network of potential salespeople, when it comes time to hire, maybe there's somebody that you've already talked with 3 months ago or 6 months ago that's ready to make a move, and they now know you, they know your company. The good people are there's a lot of competition around good people. So if they don't know who you are and you've got some job posting, it's less likely they're just going to submit the resume. Whereas if they know you because they met you 6 months ago at a meetup, and you've met them for coffee 2 or 3 times, or you've at a minimum maybe even built out a newsletter to update people about what's going on with your company, now they can see like, oh, I met this guy 6 months ago, they were at 10K MRR, and I just got this note that they got their first big enterprise deal. That's really awesome. It sounds like this rocket ship's taken off. Mm-hmm. So now you have a job opening, that person's gonna be like, wow, I want to be part of that. So making hiring an everyday thing, just like selling is an everyday thing, just like capital raising is an everyday thing. That's the second step. The third step, and this answers your question directly, because with respect to, salespeople are good at selling. So I might be really good at interviewing, but it doesn't mean I'm a good salesperson. And I've made this mistake where I hired somebody who was really good at interviewing, and then I got that person in a job and it was a failure. And so one of the things that you need to do is have a really an effective interviewing strategy, and also an objective way to measure that person's abilities and their behavioral tendencies. So we're like we're a big fan of using behavioral assessments as part of your interviewing process. Specifically, we partner with a company called Zero Risk. There's other companies, DISC, Profile DISC is another one that's really popular. So, most of them do about the same thing. But it's our job to make sure that we're objectively looking at those candidates and the way that they tend to behave. It's easier when you're hiring technical people because you can say, hey, engineer, solve this problem. And they either solve it or they don't. Product person, you can say, show me a product you built. And you go, wow, that's an awesome UI. Or I love the functionality of that product. It's easier to look at their kind of body of work. Whereas a salesperson, you're just looking at their resume and they told you they're top performer and exceeded quota by 25% every month for the last 5 years. Like, you don't know if that's true. So by introducing and using behavioral assessments, it allows you to look at their tendencies as an individual and then ask good questions to make sure you're cutting through kind of the BS that can happen in an interview. So that's step 3, is having a really sound interview and assessment process. And then step 4 is having a really good onboarding process. So again, just like your customers, just because the customer signed the contract doesn't mean you're done. That's where you get started. So the onboarding process is as critical to the hiring process as recruiting and defining the job. Because put yourself in that person's shoes. And I've been that person who's joined a startup 3 different times. If you're like, hey, let's get started, and you show up Monday and you walk in and everybody's like, can I help you?
Yeah.
Like, how does that make me feel? Or you show up and they go, oh, sorry, we don't, your laptop's coming in 3 days. And meanwhile, have a seat and we'll get in touch with, we'll get you started in a little while. Like, onboarding, you should have a plan, just like you should have a plan for your customers. Like, hey, when you sign, this is what's going to happen the first day, the first week, the first month. These are all the great things that are going to happen. You should have the same thing with your onboarding process with your new hires. Say, look, day 1, this is how it's going to run. Day 2, week 1, week 2, month 1, month 2. These are all the ways that we're going to make sure that we get you up and running as quickly as possible. And that doesn't always mean that you, the CEO or the founder, have to do all of that work. That's where you want to pull in teammates. Set up some time with the engineering team, set up time with the product team, set up time with current customers. Give that person a plan so they know that they joined a company with some serious focus, so they're not feeling this sense of regret, like, oh man, I signed up to work with a startup. Like, what the hell did I just do? So those are the 4 steps: to find the job, find the people, interview process, and then onboard.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, Scott, because we've made all these mistakes and figured out that just-in-time hiring never works. And we do have, 6 months ago, we've kind of introduced we started using Predictive Index, which helps us in behavior assessment. And since, of course, there's still room for improvement for us, but we've seen that, at least we have weeded out a lot of people, which we would have gotten probably informer self hired them. Great. So now you've kind of, you have a product market fit. A little bit know about distribution, distribution of product, not in the physical world, but you also have hired people. Now, how do you go, how do you go about training your sales people constantly? Like, what is the training program that you should set? And how do you also get into the incentivization? Like, should you focus on it while you're hiring itself, or you should keep it fluid? And as and when, different people perform differently, you are very open to that. Because it's, the salespeople, it's so dependent, like the life of startup, the cash flow is dependent on how well you perform. So make them part of it and then decide on the incentivization. How would you go about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. This is also a question that comes up all the time. And the short answer that everybody hates is it depends.
It depends. Yes and no.
It depends.
Yeah.
But more specifically, what I mean by that is, if you're truly early stage, like even if you've gotten your first 10 customers as a CEO, as a founder, and now you've hired that first salesperson, it's easy to put a bunch of numbers in a spreadsheet and say, hey, it took us 18 months to get our first 10 paying customers. And now looking forward, we think we're going to get 3 customers per month at $20,000 per year per customer. And so that's your job. And I'm going to base my commissions on you, salesperson, hitting these numbers. Well, do we really have the evidence that that's the growth path do we even know that the product can support that? Can the company support that? Is there that much market demand? Is that the pace that we can sell? Maybe it's faster. It's probably slower. So what I typically recommend is to start your incentive programs and just think of them in 3 to 6 month deliverables. And even if it's not straight up commission, like let's sit down with that salesperson and say, look, over the next, and when we work with clients, we do 100-day plans. We say, look, over the next 100 days, what are the key outcomes that we have to hit as a company? And let's figure out where you as a salesperson fit into those outcomes. And let's make that behavior, like those things that you do as a salesperson, whether it's phone calls or conferences or whatever else that it takes to help us reach those outcomes. And let's base your bonus or your incentive around those activities and hitting those metrics over the next 3 or 6 months. And then after 3 or 6 months, we'll build a new plan that may fundamentally shift the incentive, because maybe we need you after those first 3 to 6 months. Maybe the behaviors and the activities we had you do those first 3 to 6 months are going to be totally different than the ones for the second 6 month period. So what that means is you need to have, there's a certain kind of personality, a certain kind of person as a salesperson that says, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with shifting a compensation plan because I'm more on board with the mission and vision and direction and the impact that we want to make with this company than I am worried about, am I going to earn 0.2% commission or 0.3% commission on every sale? Like, those kinds of people are going to be valuable to you when you're a $100 million company. But right now, at the earliest stage, you need somebody who is on board with the mission vision of the company, that's willing to work in a somewhat ambiguous environment, and frankly knows that I may not be doing a lot of sales work. I might be doing a lot of customer support work or marketing work or product work. I remember when I was hired at Blend, the third startup, I was hired to go sell stuff. But when I look back at my first 18 months in that job, I probably spent 15% of my time actually selling. The rest of the time I spent doing pilot program implementation, like going on site with customers. At one point I was in Dallas, Texas, sitting in a cubicle for 8 out of 9 weeks with a mortgage company, helping them implement a pilot that we had sold. Had nothing to do with sales, technically speaking, but had everything to do with the success of the company, because we needed that pilot to go really, really well to be our first hallmark client, to go to the rest of the market and go, hey, we implemented this for this company, and those are the results we got for them. And now we have leverage to go and sell to the rest. So while I wasn't selling, I was just doing implementation work and project management work, and even some product work, because I was collecting requirements and giving them to the product team. That was what the company needed me to do to be successful. I didn't care. I didn't even get paid a commission. Like, they hired me and said, this is your salary. Here's some equity that you can earn over time. Here's your salary. Let's go do this. Either on board or you're not. And I was on board with the mission and vision of the company. The company founders were people I believed in. The market is a market I knew was ripe for disruption. I had a ton of experience in it. I knew I could make an impact. This is a way for me to join that rocket ship. And then I knew the money would take care of itself down the road. So those are the kind of people you need to go find, not the person that's worried about what's my next commission check going to be like.
And when do you know that, this is working with one of my hiring that I've done? Or how much time would you give to someone before you say, like, okay, this is not working, with this sales rep or, sales manager or VP sales, and say, like, enough,
Yeah.
like, let's move on? How many quarters, or should be like, how would you go about doing that?
I think less is better. I think, 100 days, do that first 100-day plan and say, look, let's both decide. Like, let's not make this, I, CEO, I'm evaluating you, salesperson. Let's us together evaluate the process of our work together. And let's just decide over the next 100 days if this is a good fit or not. Because frankly, we're probably going to know in the first 2 weeks if this is a good fit or not. And if it's not a good fit, let's not pretend this is a good fit. And maybe in the first couple of weeks, things are a little choppy, and let's sit down and talk about how we adjust this and get calibrated and get back on course. But look, if it's 100 days, that's a quarter of the year. I always talk to my companies. I say, look, a startup year is like dog years. Yeah. So like a dog, every 1 year in human life is 7 years in dog's life. Yeah. That's what it's like being a startup. You're trying to get done in 1 year what most companies try to get done in 7 years, right? So a quarter of the year is like 2 years of time, basically. So are you willing to work with somebody? Like, would you logically say, I'm going to hire somebody and work with that person for 2 years and then decide whether or not they're a good fit? No, of course not. So let's make that decision as quickly as possible. I've let people go within 3 weeks. I've sat down, we hired somebody, it was a bad hire, and that was our fault for hiring this person. We put that person in a position where she was just not able to succeed. And we sat down, we said, look, this is what we need you to do. This is what, we're asking you to do. If you're not comfortable doing it, or you don't feel like you can do it, or you don't want to do it, just tell us now. And the very next day, that person gave us a resignation letter and said, this is not a good fit. It was in 3 weeks. We're like, cool. And we just move on. But this is not a social charity here. And it's better for you to only have people on board with the mission and vision. And it's better for them because they're going to feel like an outcast.
Yeah.
And they're like, everyone's going to know it. It's like this, you feel it if people on the team, whether it's an engineer, product person, finance person, anyone, right? So let's not pretend that everything's fine when it's not. If it's not fine, let's sit down, have a conversation and say, look, together, let's make a decision about this, whether it's going to work or it's not going to work. And if it's not going to work, that's fine. Let's just agree to part ways and do everything you can to make that exit as easy and as smooth as possible for the next person. Help them find the next job. Introduce them to friends of yours where they might be a good fit. Be amicable as much as possible. I had this with a client yesterday. He said one of his engineers is leaving. It's one of his personal friends. And the engineer is like, I have to make this move. He's like, what do I do? And I said, what you do is you give that person your unequivocal support. And you ask that person, what can I do to help you with this transition? Because if it's like, there's no reason to try to keep somebody or not keep somebody if it's not a good fit. So let's just be human about this and move on and make the next best decision that we can.
Great. Now, so my next question is more toward, like you said, there are different stages of growth in startup, and every time you move from one stage to another, sometimes you plateau, but sometimes you also get down. There's a dip in your curve, right? Probably, and largely I'm talking from cash flow perspective. You would probably hire, invest a little bit in marketing, which would increase your expense. Get also more people. Not all of them would be performing, which would mean a little delay in your in the plans that you've made. But very few actually manage to cross that dip, and a large move from dip to that. How would you recommend us to overcome this dip or overcome the surprises that normally you would get in scaling?
Yeah. So to make sure I'm understanding the question right, things could be growing and then all of a sudden you hit some kind of roadblock or some kind of obstacle.
You keep on doing that. Like you said, like you move a few stages, then you again, you kind of, there's the inertia there again, then again you move. It's not always, straight 45 degrees. Of
course not. No, it's more like this.
Yeah. It's a sine wave, but increasing in an amplitude.
Hopefully increasing. Yeah. So there's a couple of ways that I think about this. If I could share a couple of these frameworks, I think it would be useful. So the first one is at Blend, which I mentioned a little while ago, our CEO, a guy named Nima Gamsari, super guy, really, really knows his stuff. Worked at Palantir for a while, helped build the mortgage arm of Palantir before starting Blend. And he and I used to do one-on-one every week or two, go for a walk. And the very first question, almost every single time we talked, he goes, are we trending up or trending down? And it was just like his way of getting my temperature on gauging how I felt things were going. Now, sometimes I might feel like things are trending down, but everything else that he's seeing is trending up. And sometimes he might see everything trending up and I'm like, hey, things are trending down, or vice versa, right? Yeah. And so it's a way to know, like, hey, we're going to have, and that was his philosophy. Like, he knows we're going to have these dips and we're going to have these peaks. But if we have a peak, as long as we know that it's just a normal, or if we know we have a dip, then as long as it's a normal dip, then it's okay, because we know we're going to recover from it. There's going to be hiccups in product development or in engineering, or the customer that you spent so much time selling to, who you thought was going to be that big pilot customer, all of a sudden says no because the executive got recruited to work for a competitor. You're like, I spent 9 months selling this deal. We thought we were going to get it. And now it's gone, right? As long as it's sort of like a normal dip, that's one way to think about it, is like, are we trending up or trending down? You can have day-to-day ups and downs. You can have week-to-week up and down, month-to-month up and down. But as long as we're moving in the right direction. And the way we do this with our clients is we're always celebrating success and look back. We say, look, if we look back 1 year from today, it's middle of May, but go back 1 year and think about where your business was around your prospecting, around your pipeline, the way you're pricing, the way you're retaining your customers. What progress have you made? And just asking that question, like a lot of times it lights people up. They realize like, holy crap, like a year ago, I was really struggling. I had no real repeatable prospecting system in place. I had no deals in the pipeline. I was kind of hoping and praying that the one I had was going to close, and thankfully it did because it kept the company going. And now if I look at the way we're prospecting, the way we got deals in the pipeline, the way we're pricing, we're now doubled our price over the last year. You realize like, okay, this month has been tough, or even this quarter has been tough. But if I go back 12 months and see where I was to where I am, turns out that things are moving forward. So that's the second way to think about it. So first is, are we trending up, trending down? Second is always taking stock of progress we've made. The third way I think about this is something that I heard. I first heard it from Phil Libin, who is the founder of Evernote. And he talked in an interview about a guy named Hiroshi Mikitani, who is I think he's a Japanese businessman. His company is Rakuten. Rakuten, yeah. So Mikitani talks about the rule of 3 and 10. The rule of 3 and 10, which basically says every time your company grows by a multiple of 3 or 10, everything breaks. So if you're like say a small three-person company, the systems that you built, the way you acquire customers, everything you do as a 3-person company works pretty well until you get to about 10 people. And when you get to 10 people, all the systems and all the ways you do stuff, it just breaks and you have to rebuild. So you rebuild a new system for the 10-person company, how you get customers, how you price, how you function, how you communicate, how you build product, how you recruit, all that stuff. And that roughly works until you get to 30 people. So there's a 3 and then the 10 and then the 3 again. So when you get to 30 people, everything breaks again. You're like, I got to rebuild stuff again. And then you rebuild again at 30, and then you kind of roughly those systems work until you get to 100, and then everything breaks again. And so I found that to be really useful from my own personal experience, because when I go back through the companies I've worked at, I'm like, yeah, I was person number 3, and we were fine until 10, and then everything broke. And then at 10, it was fine until 30, and then everything broke. So it was useful for me to see that in retrospect. What's important as a manager, as a company executive, as a person that's growing a business, is prepare for that. So look ahead and say, look, we're a 10-person company now. At the end of the year, we're going to be 15. By the end of next year, we want to be 30. So let's think now about the stuff we're doing, the way we're communicating, the way we're getting customers, the way that we're interacting with each other, building product, all of those things. What changes can we make now in preparation for when we're a 30-person company, so that 30-person company, when things break, it's not as painful. And so that will help you mitigate for some of those dips that might happen if you think about this framework ahead of time and prepare for it. So those are the 3 ways that I think about that question.
Yeah, I think while you were talking, I was smiling, and the reason for that was exactly we went from 3 to 10 and 10 to 35. Yep. And there were a lot of changes. I need to fire a few, get back, try to refocus and reprocess, and then I wish I had talked to you before, but coming back to this,
I hear that a lot. Like pretty much every client that I talk to, they're like, I wish I would have started working with you 6 months ago.
Yeah,
somehow now.
Yeah, somehow even though I read a lot, the real experiences of life are pretty much different, and which brings me back. I've been a VC as well, and I've seen a lot of companies failing, not because their product, I really don't believe, products are perfect. You make it perfect over a period of time. But I've seen that, sales process normally doesn't exist. In your experience, how would you, recommend to people, our audience, that how important it is to have for you a sales process or process in general, and why is it, what is the difference between somebody who is successful, a startup that is successful, and startup, largely many of them failing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, big question. So the way I think about this, two things come to mind. So first is purely from a selling standpoint. Yeah. It was described to me that in this way: if you don't have a process for selling, you're at the mercy of the buyer's process for buying. If you don't have a process for selling, you're at the mercy of the buyer's process for buying. And what I mean by that, and this kind of goes back to the copying thing that we talked about before. If we're just like sending emails or having meetings and hoping that the meeting goes well, or the person asks for a one-pager. We send the one-pager. We hope that they share it with the team. We send a proposal. We hope that they read it and get back to us. If we're sending stuff out and hoping, that's a pretty aimless way to run a business. And instead, what we need to do is say, well, look, when they ask for a proposal, this is what I'm going to do instead. Because I know if I send a proposal, they get back to me on the 19th of never. Like, I'm going to send the proposal. When are they going to get back to me? Never. Freaking never is when they get back to you. So let's stop sending proposals. Let's not be subject to their buying process. Let's instead say, great, would love to send you a proposal. Before we do that, let's sit down and put together a work plan, an implementation plan, so I know exactly what you need from me, and you know what I need from you in order for our work to be successful. Once we do that, then I'll be able to put down the proposal and get you what you want. Like, that's having a selling process, not being at the mercy of the buyer's process for buying. So it's a really hard thing for entrepreneurs that want to make an impact. Like, they finally get in touch with the person, they finally get the meeting, and they feel like, oh my God, I'm so glad that I get this time with this person, and I'm just going to do whatever they say. But at the end of the day, that person is only buying this product once, whereas you're selling it every day. So who's better able to provide some clarity and some control and some confidence to the whole process than you? So we had this morning with a client who was helping her out with a deal that she was working on. And I said, she's like, well, there was a stakeholder, had this product champion, and there's this whole group of stakeholders. So I sent the stuff to the product champion, who was then meeting with the stakeholders, and I'm still waiting to hear back. I said, well, why didn't you get in touch with the stakeholders in the first place? She's like, the product champion said that they would take care of it. I said, okay, well, now we know. What you need to do is say, before I send that proposal to the product champion, happy to send that to you. Let's grab 15 minutes with the key stakeholders and decision makers, so we know exactly what they need, so I can put together a proposal that they want to say yes to. So that's having a selling process. So that's one thing you absolutely have to have. As far as a process in general, I think, again, it goes back to how your calendar determines your cash flow. Show me your calendar, and I'll tell you what your cash flow looks like. Wow. And what I mean by that, if I say, like, I had this the other day I was in a workshop, and room full of founders, company founders, mostly tech companies. And I got talking to this one guy, and I said, do you do product sprints every week? He said, well, yeah, of course we do. We sit down with the team, we do a sprint, we do stand-ups every day. We talk through what needs to be done, what are the blockers, where do they need help. We always have that meeting. I was like, cool. Do you have a sales sprint every week? He's like, well, sometimes. I said, what do you mean sometimes? Well, sometimes we just get really busy and we just push off that meeting. I said, that's your problem. Sales is a sometimes thing. Product is an all the time thing. What if sales was an all the time thing? What if you made that part of your business as important as the product side? What if you had sales stand-ups every day? Like, on my team, I have Steven in New York and Julian in Mexico City. We get on Zoom every single morning, and we do a 15-minute stand-up. What are you working on right now on sales? Where do you need help? Where are you stuck? Like, it's an all-the-time thing. So you have to make sales an all-the-time thing. And so if I look at your calendar and you've got a bunch of meetings with investors, and you're spending time on product, and you're recruiting engineers, and you're doing all this stuff, but I look at your calendar and you've got, like, oh yeah, I've got 2 sales calls on Thursday afternoon, and that's your sales week, that's going to determine whether or not you're successful. And I'm not saying that any of the other stuff is less important, but most company founders feel like sales is a sometimes thing. They don't make it enough of a priority. And when they have to choose, they push off the sales thing. Even if that means I don't have a sale. A lot of times they think, oh, I don't have a sales meeting, therefore I don't do sales. No. You block off Wednesday afternoon from 2 to 4, and you say, that's my sales time. I'm going to fill those 2 hours with sales work, whether that's prospecting or calling up existing customers and asking them, why are they happy? Or looking at other pricing models, or working on my demo. Take an hour and say, look, I did 3 demos the last 3 weeks. I'm going to go back and think. I'm going to look at those recordings and say, these are the things that I did wrong. I could do better. And take an hour of that time block and work on making your demo better. Even though you're not talking to customers, that's improving your sales process. So if you don't have that time in your calendar, you're not going to get the cash flow that you want. So that's why I say, show me your calendar and I'll show you your cash flow.
That's a great one. I'm going to use that. Which brings me to the last question. And since you read a lot of books, which is that one book that you would recommend to all our audience?
Oh, that's easy. It's called Startup Selling, and it's by a guy named Scott Sambucci.
Okay. Yeah.
But here's the best thing, actually. I wanted to mention this at the top, but I forgot. For people that are listening to this webinar, we built a special page and the website is startupselling.co. Startupselling.co. If you go to that webpage, you can download a free copy of the book. You can download a free copy of the book. This is a book that we sell for $11 on Amazon. You get it for free if you want it. So just go to startupselling.co. So that's one book I always recommend to people. The second book that I've been pretty high on, I like my books, my special favorite books kind of rotate a little bit, but the one that's really impacted me over the last 6 months is a book by a guy named Greg McKeown, and it's called Essentialism. Essentialism by a guy named Greg McKeown. And basically it's all about focusing on that which is the most important parts of your day, of your work, and just getting everything else off. Like most of the stuff that most of us do is probably not that important. And I have a saying that I use I use it myself as a kind of a rule, and I use it with clients all the time, which is focus on now, and worry about later. Focus on now, and worry about later. And what I mean by that is a lot of times we might be on a sales call and we feel like, oh, like tomorrow I've got to go to this conference, and later on I've got an interview with this engineer, and your mind is distracted on these other things. Meanwhile, you've got a potential customer sitting in front of you. Like focus on that now. Like right now I'm here with you on this webinar. Everything else is shut off, right? Like focus on now, worry about later. And this book, Essentialism, really helped to structure a lot of that thinking for me, both individually, but also as a company leader and also with clients, that everything you should be doing should be moving you closer and closer to the impact that you want to make. Because if we're trying to do a lot of things at one time, you're moving in a lot of different directions, and it's hard to make progress towards the end goal. And so this book was really useful for me. It's something that I've had my team read, and it's something I recommend to all my clients. So the two books are Startup Selling, startupselling.co. Go there, grab a free copy. And then the second book that I recommend is by Greg McKeown called Essentialism.
Perfect.
Great.
I think Deepika will ask a few questions that our users have asked for.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about how somebody had asked about how you go about scaling up after you've got 100 customers. So I think it's kind of tied to you doing a live sales training on Thursday, which is on the same topic. So could you just give us a preview into that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple ways to think about scaling. So one is, do I have a repeatable process for how I sell my stuff? And that's the framework that we're going to be talking through on the webinar that we're hosting. There's also just in terms of what jobs do I hire for? And so from a sales standpoint, the exercise that I encourage people to do is think through your entire sales funnel, all the way from, even if you're doing some marketing, just to pull people into your sales funnel, all the way through to the point where they are a happy, referenceable customer that you can even upsell. And think about, like, what's every little step along the way? It could be 20 steps, 50 steps. It doesn't matter. Like, just map those out. Every little step from, picking up the phone and calling the first lead, doing a demo, following up with a demo, getting other people on the phone, whatever that is. Oftentimes what you find is that the first places that you can hire are on the ends of that sales process, meaning that the first people that you can typically hire are like sales development people that their job is to find marketing qualified leads and then qualify them. And once that lead is qualified, move them into a sales funnel so that you as a company founder or a VP of sales are spending most of your time with leads that are already qualified. And you can teach somebody pretty quickly, these are the questions to ask, this is how you prepare for those calls, and here's how you run a 15-minute sales qualification call. Do 100 of those every day, right? That's going to save you.
Something you're going to be covering on Thursday as well?
We're not going to be covering that specifically.
Okay.
Yeah. And then on the backside of the sales process as well, like customer success, that's also something you can probably train to and scale so that you as a company founder and the people that are the highest value in your organization, you're focused most of your time on the high value parts of the sales process, doing the product demos, answering hard technical questions, making sure that you're overcoming objections, all the stuff that really requires some specialization. So oftentimes if you hire out for the ends of your sales process, that's a way to scale your team quickly and get more out of the time that you have.
Okay. And I had a question about your current business, SalesQualia. Do you engage only with enterprises, or is it that you engage with startups as well, or solopreneurs or founders?
Yeah, we typically work with startup founders, enterprise. So we work with enterprise companies, like companies selling to the enterprise. So whether it's we have some web developers and mobile app developers, most of our customers are tech companies, whether it's software, AI, data, all of the other sort of tech kinds of products. We have done some work with larger enterprises, and the place where we can work with a larger enterprise is places where that enterprise knows they need to act more like a startup, whether it's on the sales team or they're releasing a new product line or entering a new market, and they've got a sales team dedicated to that. And even though they're under this umbrella of a very large company, that group is really kind of a startup within the larger organization. That's where we can be effective as long as we feel like it's the right fit for us. As far as like working with 100-person sales teams and walking and doing sales training, there's a million people that do that. That's not what I do. Our job is to teach people, like I said earlier, like I teach you your sales process, and that means by definition we're going to be building this together.
To talk about Scott doing a live sales training on Thursday. That's the 17th of May.
Yeah.
And it's going to be on how you can scale your business. So in today's webinar, we covered how to get your first 100 customers. I think Scott's going to talk about how you get from 100 to 1,000 or maybe 100 to 10,000 on Thursday. So whoever's got the time, please make sure you go through it. I've shared in almost all the groups, so many of you really benefit from that, as you can see.
Cool. Thanks for that. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you, Scott, so much for your time and insight. I mean, I personally learned a lot, really enjoyed it a lot. And I'm going to see you soon on Thursday. I'm going to join your webinar and be there.
Oh, that's great, man.
Same, me too.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. All right, guys. We'll see ya.
Okay, bye. See ya.